long title, but honestly, it's not that confusing. So what I'm going to look at today is how we can track all of our touch points within Marketing Cloud Account Engagement, or PARDOT, for those of you that know it as that, for effective marketing ROI. So I'm going to be running through why did we kind of create this solution, why are we looking at this solution, how we currently track marketing activity in account engagement, some of the steps to get us there, an outline of this custom solution that we've come up with to allow for this, a bit of a process overview, very quick code walkthrough. I'm not going to go in depth on code. It is not going to blow your minds. I'm just going to keep it very nice and high level for us. A bit of Salesforce setup, and then where next? What can we start doing with this, as well as Q&A at the end. So why did we create this solution? Anyone in the previous session about marketing tech as well was like, why can't we figure out exactly where all of our individual prospects, clients, opportunities have come from, how they've got there, the steps they've taken throughout that journey. We've got that information hidden away in all of our systems, but there's nowhere that unifies that and actually allows us to see some of that activity on those individuals. So currently at the moment in account engagement, we've got the first and third party tracking cookies running at the moment. When you set up your org for the first time, both of those options are kind of available at the moment there, and you can start to use those. So we've got a tracking cookie, which is a great starting point. That allows us to see activity that individuals have. We then see that individual prospect activity on the prospect record. You can see the image at the bottom shows a snapshot of that. I've got landing page and some page visits itself. We can see this activity on visitors to our site, but they're anonymized as a visitor with a visitor ID. We can only see that activity on an individual basis inside account engagement when they have converted to a prospect. So for our terminology of what a prospect is, someone that has an email address is what we class as that. These can be hard to action at the moment. I'm sure if some of you have seen in your orgs, you're trying to get hold of this activity, you can see it on a prospect activity. You can definitely see some of these channels. So you can see email, for example, is very clear and you can take actions off that. You can off some tracking links and some of those other options. But most of the time, you're actually having to have some sort of conversion activity. So a form or an email or something like that. It's great once we've got that email address and we've got that activity. But what happens outside of that? Lastly, we do have a lovely Google Analytics connector. It is a great tool to allow us to add UTMs in UTM tracking parameters when we're inside, say, looking at tracked links. It does also pick up UTM information on individuals, but that's only the first touch point. So it has to be the first touch point that actually attributes and fills those fields by default. So that's how we're currently able to see and track our activity inside account engagement. Now, some of the things that I've spoken about there, we can start to close the gap on that. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times UTMs, but these are going to become really powerful. We use them in a lot of our marketing activity. So when we're doing paid ads, when we're doing social, when we're doing our emails, a lot of the time we'll be adding UTMs as best practice. Those are a great way for us to start to capture information around the channel that people are coming in from, the campaigns they're coming in from, the type of medium that they're coming in, and other parameters as well. We can add as many custom parameters to that as we wish. So we've got that. Now, there's a lovely Jenna Mulby article, which is on the Spot for Pardot, or the Spot now, and that is around UTM capture solutions. So what that does is that's actually taking those UTMs and allowing us to capture them as hidden fields on our forms. So it's a great first step. You can see here, I've got an example of our form fields, and you can see our UTM values, and a Google Click ID as well, which is relevant when you're using Google Ads. Now, these allow us to take that step in. So we can now go, when someone has come to our website and completed this form, we have a way of being able to go, here is the way that they've come in and completed that form. We can also look to enhance that again. So we can capture that repeated times. So we can use multiple touch points to capture these steps. So someone comes in for the first time, I have UTMs on, I complete a form, great. I come back 6 months later through another paid link with UTMs on, complete a form, that's captured again, fantastic, there's 2 touch points for me. We might have a 3rd, 4th, 5th before I become an opportunity or make a purchase as a client. So we can build up a bit of a picture. You can see this very quick kind of flow there, which is within that link as well, around a custom object that allows us to store multiples of these. So if we're constantly updating these fields, these individual fields, we're going to overwrite information. So what we have to do is look at those where we capture the information once and we pass it off to a custom object and store multiple records on the custom object related back to the prospect that would become a lead or contact in Salesforce. So we've got multiple touch points for them. That solution itself is great, but it's only capturing touch points when there is a conversion. On the slide before, you saw in the prospect activity, you might have seen visits, right? What happens when someone comes to our site with UTMs and they don't convert in that session, right? We can see that in our Google Analytics platforms or our other analytics platforms we're using. We can see it on an individual basis. But what we can't see is group that together and apply that as an additional touch point. So we're not just looking at, and the title of this is capturing every touch point. As long as that cookie is active and is seeing you, we can start to capture those visits. So we're capturing visits, we're capturing forms, we're capturing emails, we're capturing every single touch point someone has. And if there are UTMs in that session, the solution we've looked at is going to get them. So, as I kind of mentioned there, the goal of this is capture every touch point where there is a UTM value present in the URL. The method we've done is we've used Python code running daily to do this. The tools we're using is Salesforce, the APIs, account engagement tracking cookie, and Heroku, the scheduler within the Heroku app. The outcome of this is we are able to identify our traffic sources and effectively measure marketing ROI. So the way that the solution worked at a high level is we use the tracking code from account engagement, which if you have account engagement, you probably have on your website already. So it is already accessible to you and is already capturing data. That becomes really relevant later on when I talk about there are options to backfill this data as well. So it is not a line in the sand and forward only. You can look back with it. We have our code hosted in Heroku. Other locations are available, but keeping it all on the Salesforce tech stack, that was one way that we took to do that. And lastly, the Salesforce platform itself hosts the data that we capture and makes it visible to us. If any of us have used account engagement reporting, it's okay, right? Salesforce has much better reporting functionality, and therefore we want to leverage that. So, high-level process overview. We do a daily workflow, and that is extracting data. So what it's looking for is it's looking in the account engagement, I nearly said pardot then, I'm trying my best, in the account engagement visitor and prospect, so the visit itself. So it's going to look at the visit object and say, is there a visit to the site, and the URL has UTM parameters in it. If it sees that, it takes that information, it identifies those UTMs. So it's going to say, look, great, there's UTMs, tick, that's met. What it then does is it looks to see if that visit, each visit has a visit ID or a visitor ID associated to it. What it's then going to do is go, does this also have a prospect ID that relates to that? If so, we retrieve all our prospects as well. We then prepare the data, make it nice and formatted so that Salesforce accepts it nicely, and then we do a data import into Salesforce. We do that import into 2 custom objects. A UTM touchpoint, which captures all of those touchpoints I've mentioned, and a prospect/visitor ID object. And that is going to hold all of that visitor ID, which relates, it will come in useful again because it will connect all the dots back up together so we can get everything. I told you I won't go into code, and I promise I will not. This is the most code you're going to see on a page, this and the next one. So for a configuration standpoint, we look at making sure we pull all the fields that we want out there. You can see in this example, we've got another tool working alongside UTMs as well. They had additional parameters in this particular scenario that we were capturing in order to be able to see all their marketing activity. If you're using different platforms, you'll have different things. An example would be is you've got an ad ID, a GCL ID, and a Microsoft Click ID. That's for Bing. So there's differences there. If they're using different platforms, they'll have different IDs that we wanted to capture anything we possibly could. We make sure we're mapping these. So in this situation, you've got UTM source, but you also have a CR source. So you want to make sure that while you're capturing all of that, you want to push it into one particular field. So you want to make sure your mappings are correct. And then we wanted to look at any environment variables. So that's anything within our Salesforce environment that we need to be aware of with this. Next, we actually do the data extraction. So we log in via the API. So we set up a connected app and we set up an API user that had access to this. We then ran a par.export export and ran our data processing. This is just a bit of an example. I mentioned, we're looking at the visitor and a page view. So these are the things at the moment that we can see in the UI when we look at a prospect record. Inside account engagement, we can see visits. And when we click on those visits, we can see exactly what they were, what pages they were on our site, and what UTMs they might have had. What we can't see, or what we can't do with that information, is make it accessible for reporting. We can't see that information and actually make actions off the back of it. So that's what we're doing here. We're extracting that. We're looking at everything between yesterday and today, and we're pulling these particular fields at this point. The URL field is what's going to have our UTMs in it. Once we formatted that data, made it correct, made it look, so split up, one example would be is in that URL, we split out the UTMs and we pull them out. We then do a bulk API import. What we make sure is, as I mentioned, we make sure the field mappings are correct, and then we run any error handling. You can see here, we've done 2 types of bulk import jobs. We are running the UTM touchpoints, so we're updating all those different touchpoints that the users have had. And if we do have a prospect with a prospect associated with that visitor ID, we also upload to that. I'm sure we're all aware in account engagement, we can have visits or people that have visited that have not yet converted. So they have a visitor ID, but not a prospect ID. And likewise, we can have people with a prospect ID so they're a prospect in account engagement, but they're not a lead or contact in Salesforce yet, or Sales Cloud. So we have some gaps in our data, but that gets filled over time as people progress through our journey. So on that, for our Salesforce setup, we make sure that we've got the user configured correctly and a connected app. And we make sure that our mapping process is in place. So this is the key part of that. We've pushed all that data into Salesforce, but we need to make sure that it's associated correctly. For our reporting, we need to connect up the dots between our leads and contacts, this UTM touchpoints, and the prospect information we see inside account engagement. So the prospect visitor ID is our bridge. That allows us to build the gap between our touchpoints and our leads and contacts. That means we can actually start to report on our leads and contacts alongside all of their different touchpoints. So a quick high level of what that flow looked like in there. We've got a record triggered flow that is configured to run on the UTM touchpoint object. It then looks to see if there's a linked person or lead and referral. So in this example, with this test environment that we were looking at, a person is a contact and a lead and referral is a lead in traditional Salesforce sense of that word. It runs to see if there is a relationship between them. And if so, it then updates the UTM touchpoint with the contact or the lead associated to it. So what we do is we then fill that gap. So our touch points are then there's going to be a one-to-many relationship between a contact or a lead and multiple touch points. So we've run that entire process. I've gone through that very quickly. I only got 25 minutes. I could probably do a talk on it for 2.5 hours, but I didn't want to bore you with massive amount of code and all of the insights onto that. What are the reporting outcomes we can see from this? So one thing we can see here, and I've hidden the actual contact themselves, but you can see down this side, I hope you can anyway, that there's a visitor ID column. That visitor ID column, this is really clever. This is the information of one contact. What we can actually see here is that one contact has 3 different visitor IDs. And that could be split over multiple devices, could be multiple sessions with clearing cookies and re-engaging them again. But the information that they filled in on forms that have connected the visitor ID to the prospect ID is that it's actually linked them all back to the same one. So we've been able to really, in a really clever way, understand the touch point dates, that actually this is one person, but different cookies are tracking them, all relating back to that one. We name our touch point. We can see the source, campaign, content, medium, term. We can see a GCL ID or an ad ID if it's there. In this case, we know that this has come from Google Ads. And we've made sure that we're set up that our Google Ads has a default field in the background that actually has our UTMs in it. So we're able to extract them as well, because a GCL ID will just override those. So what we've got here is a great story of different interaction touch points that we've had with this individual. Now, one of the insights we got back from one of our particular clients that we've built this for is we managed to run this process, and I mentioned a little bit earlier that we can actually run a batch retroactive search back, an association. We found an extra 187,000 UTM touch points on their data set that they didn't have before. They didn't have insight on this before inside their Salesforce platform. We then found contacts with UTM source of 18,000 contacts with that. They can all have multiple on. I think one I found that had about 93 different touch points in some capacity on. You can definitely see, you start to build a picture. We can see where they've come from. We can see the contacts, which channels are actually driving the most. So CPC being cost per click. So that's probably Google or Bing. And then we can also see the campaigns that have worked and have started to drive the most contacts, as well as we'd start to be able to see different reports of this that show different channels that are working, we can see different terms that work. So we can actually start to use this information to make actionable insights as well. Where next with this? So you've seen some very high level Salesforce reports there and what we've got there. Where we can actually start to look at where this can go is we can get this into Tableau, Datorama, and everyone's favorite word at the moment, Data Cloud. So the future of this is not just pushing the data back into Salesforce, but where can we house it, where we can run it against other data sets, where we can start to action it, where we can build the reports that us as marketers go, oh, what do my leadership team need to see? We're spending X amount of money on Google Ads. What's actually working? Not just what's driving conversions in the traditional marketing sense of this is a conversion of a form fill. We start to back out what's driving the actual conversion of opportunities. Now, within that, we can use all these touch points to build up that story, right? We can say the touch point that comes in first is from Google Ads most of the time. The one that gets them over the line is an email. right? We can build up insights like that. Google Ads is here because once we've got this data captured, we can push it back into there, right? There's a Google Ads to Salesforce integration that when we capture GCL IDs, we can push it back in. We can carry those through to our leads and our opportunities. So there's a lot of scope in there with that. We've also got part of that, we've got an automated opportunity contact role that we've been working on at Cante that helps to bridge the gap between those as well. One other thing that I haven't got on here that we can absolutely do is now we've got these UTMs, we can actually use those UTMs to assign people to campaigns, right? And once we're assigning them to campaigns, we can use the Salesforce campaign influence models to make sure that we're actually attributing ROI to these campaigns that are driving actual leads and opportunities into our business.